At the time of writing this story, I'm 21 years old. I'm a female and I grew up in Ohio. This was one of the scariest nights of my life, and I'm still afraid to drive alone at night. At the time of this story, I was moving from a very well-known suburb outside of a main city to a small farming town with my family. My parents have never been the city type. They had both grown up on farms in the South, and our whole family have lived in similar areas until I was about to enter high school. So you can understand how itchy they were to get back to their roots. I am the youngest of 4. I have 3 older brothers, and I was the last to graduate. So the summer after my senior year, my parents decided this was a good opportunity for a change in scenery, since I was no longer tied down to a school district. The town that we were moving to was only around 45 minutes away. And instead of moving everything all at once and overwhelming ourselves, my parents opted to have us move our things every few days for around 2 or 3 weeks, in the hopes that it would be easier for us to settle into the new house. The majority of the drive between the 2 towns is through main highways, and was pretty much a straight shot. That's why this night was so terrifying, because I had made this drive nearly 50 times before this. I was too comfortable, and I allowed myself to let my guard down. I'm a pretty small girl, around 5'3" and about 140 pounds. And even though my dad had taught me self-defense when I was younger, I'm the kind of person who freezes during confrontation or when I'm under pressure. It's very annoying. So it's a miracle I made it out of this alive. One night I decided to visit some old friends from the neighborhood that we were moving from. I would stop by on my way back to our new house. I can't exactly remember what time it was. I'm thinking it was around 10 or 11 o'clock at night. Regardless, it was already very dark outside. Now, even though Ohio is a northern state with pretty severe winters, in recent years the summers have been sweltering, even at night. I can also get a bit car sick in the heat with all the muggy air getting trapped in the car. At the time, my car's AC was malfunctioning, so I usually drove home with my windows down. As I said, it was pretty late. There weren't really any other cars on the road with me. I'd seen about 10 cars during the entire drive. When I was just over halfway on the second main highway, there was an intersection with a gas station on my right, and nothing but a river and bridge on the left. It was a 4-lane highway, and I was driving down the far right lane because of a turn that I had to make further up the road. This may seem like useless information, but it will be important later on. Nothing felt off initially. As I said before, I had made this trip several times before. I pulled up to a red light at this intersection, and I was playing some pop-punk music with my left arm out of the driver's side window, when another car pulled up into the left lane next to me. Looking back now, it may have been a Dodge Charger, because I do remember it was a bright orange, with a thick black stripe across the top of it. I was singing along to whatever song I had on at the time, when I heard talking next to me. It wasn't so much that I heard them talking specifically about me or anything, but they were being quite loud, and I have ADHD, so the extra noise made me turn my head. I regretted it immediately, because when I looked at the source of the noise, I saw a man sticking his head out of the passenger side window, staring directly at me, and smiling. The look in his eyes made me want to vomit. Apparently he had been talking to me. I turned back quickly, knowing that if I kept eye contact any longer, he might think that I would be interested in chatting. I then heard the sound of a hand hitting a car door. Obviously, one of the men were trying to get my attention. In the middle of all this, the front passenger started to whistle. You know, that signature catcall whistle that a lot of girls get just walking down the street. I started getting angry because I wasn't a f***ing dog, but I kept my gaze forward, praying for the light to change so I could get away from these creeps. Now, I know this sounds ridiculous that we were still sitting at this red light, but this particular traffic light had those really old and light sensors. The ones that you have to back up and pull forward just to set off again. I didn't give these men any indication that I wanted to talk to them, but apparently this gave them more incentive to continue trying to get me to look at them. The front passenger and two other voices piped up. "Hey baby, you want to ride? Why don't you hop in? We'll show you a good time tonight. Meet us at the gas station. We're not going to hurt you. Hey, why don't you talk to us? We just want to get to know you." I had heard enough, so I rolled up my window and locked the doors of my car. Well, this apparently pissed off the front passenger, because before the window was up, I heard him shout, before swinging his car door open. Before I knew it, he had gotten out of his car and walked over to the passenger door behind me, trying to pull on it. This is why explaining the specifics of my location was so important. I was basically trapped, because if I had tried to get out and go run to the gas station, or God forbid I had to run and cross the bridge on my left, I would have had to pass this other car and the man outside to get there. Obviously, getting out of the car and running would not be my best bet here, but at this point I was so terrified, and I was trying to weigh all my options. Looking back, I now know this would have been a good time to get the fuck out of there, but I was literally paralyzed in fear. Again, confrontation freaks me out. I couldn't even feel my feet to hit the gas, and my hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard, I couldn't even feel them either. The man quickly realized that he wasn't able to get in, and walked up to my window and began smacking it with his open palm. He was hitting it so hard that I actually thought I heard the glass creaking, like it was going to shatter at any moment. When I still would not look over at him, he stopped hitting the glass just long enough to spit all over the window. I have no idea what gave me strength. Perhaps it was the fact that there was a chance he would have broken the glass and forced his way inside. But right as he lifted his arm again, and what looked like him about to drive his elbow into my window, running the red light and definitely exceeding the speed limit to get the hell out of there. I don't know what made me look back, but when I glanced up at my rearview mirror, I saw that all three of the men were now standing outside of the car. I saw one of them holding a small object. To be honest, I don't even want to think about what it might have been. I almost threw up from the anxiety and pretty much cried the rest of the way home. My parents own a restaurant in the area and are usually working very late, so when I got back home, only one of my older brothers was there. He did his best to try and calm me down, but I don't think I slept at all that night. I know the fear was irrational because the men had not followed me home, but even so, I still locked my bedroom door just to make me feel a bit safer. I regret not being able to get a license plate, but as you might understand, I was so shaken up and just wanted to get out of there. I have never had an encounter like that again in that area, but granted I found an alternate route through some side streets, so I usually avoid that highway altogether. This is a story that my dad has shared with me. He grew up in a small town called Stowe in Ohio with his parents and older sister. Across the street there was a boy named Richard. He was around the same age as my father. He described him as a scrawny, red-headed troublemaker. He would spit on people as they walked by, and even set a house on fire in the neighborhood, then blamed it on a kid who had special needs. Nothing he did as a child, however, would compare to the crimes he committed when he was only 19 years old. My dad had just started his sophomore year of college when he heard the news. Richard and his friends, Clinton and Kenneth, were throwing rocks off of a local bridge onto the interstate below when one of them struck a vehicle of 21-year-old Wendy Alferendo. Her friend, 20-year-old Dawn McCreary, was also in the car. They were sorority sisters who had just gotten off of work. At this time, Kenneth decided that he had enough and went home. This is when Richard and Clinton came up with their evil plan. Both of the young men approached the girls, offering them help and to give them a ride. They drove the girls to a nearby shopping center where they would call their parents. However, Richard and Clinton tied the girls' hands together and drove them to a field behind the mall where they were assaulted and tortured for 3 grueling hours. They would abandon their bodies in that field. They then decided they wanted to sell the girls' clothing and jewelry to make some extra cash. When Richard couldn't find a buyer for the items, he burned them in his backyard, which woke my grandparents. My grandfather called the police to report what he thought was yet another neighborhood disturbance from Richard. The police gathered the evidence, and after locating Wendy's abandoned car, they arrested Richard and began the investigation. Both Richard and Clinton were arrested and charged with the murders. They found the knife that was used in the homicide in Clinton's pocket when he was arrested, and some of the burnt items still had traces of the victim's DNA. Since Clinton was only 17, he was spared the death penalty and is currently serving life in prison. Richard, however, was given the death sentence. On October 14th, 2003, at 10 a.m., Richard Wade Cooey was executed by lethal injection. Wendy's family was present at his execution. Every time I visit my grandparents' house, I look across the street to where Richard used to live, and I can't help but get the chills. I'm glad I never met Richard, and I'm also glad that my dad was smart enough to stay away from him when he was growing up. For the sake of the story, I'm going to call myself Rodney. This happened in 2011, around February. English is my second language, so please bear with me. For some information, I am a 33-year-old Haitian male living on the outskirts of London. I was 20 at the time, and I was still living with my parents. I was dating my first girlfriend, who I will refer to as Nicole. Nicole was 19, and the first 6 months of the relationship went well, and we had a lot of things in common. Nicole was originally from Martinique, which is a small island in the Caribbean. Many of the population there speak French, and so do I. She lived with her older brother and 2 male cousins. I thought I had found the one, but I was sadly mistaken. As our relationship progressed, she became more and more controlling. She would constantly argue with me, and would yell at me if she found out that I had played video games online with my longtime female friends. She even tried to fight one of my female friends because she thought I was cheating on her. My friend got the best of her, of course, and ended up kicking her ass. Eventually I had enough and broke up with her. But things began to happen about a month after our breakup, when I started dating the girl who would eventually become my wife. I'll refer to her as Jennifer. When Nicole found out that I was dating somebody else, she became furious. She started calling my phone multiple times and sending me threatening emails. Her brother also left me some very alarming voicemails. "You scumbag. You're going to suffer for hurting my little sister's feelings. I know where you live, and I'm coming for you." Jennifer was concerned, but I didn't think anything would happen. But again, I was sadly mistaken. One night, both of my parents were out of town, so Jennifer and I were all alone, having a good time. We then heard someone hitting the front door. It wasn't like somebody was knocking. It was like they were trying to break it down. "I told you that I would come for you, didn't I? I'm gonna kill you and that little with. You should have never hurt my sister, and now you're going to pay." I recognized the man's voice right away. It was Nicole's older brother. We ran upstairs to my bedroom, and we soon heard the maniac downstairs bust open the front door and began to make his way inside. But we also heard other people running into the house, followed by a commotion. We locked ourselves in the bedroom and called the police. They showed up not even a minute later. It turns out that the other people who ran into the house were our next-door neighbors. They saw what was going on and decided to intervene. The police found a huge kitchen knife in his backpack. Both my ex-girlfriend and her older brother were arrested for attempted manslaughter. Now I know what you might be thinking. Attempted manslaughter? The man planned on murdering both of us. But remember, this is the UK. The justice system here is a complete joke. However, Nicole and her deranged brother were deported back to Martinique. But there's just one problem with this. Martinique is a French territory, so they can easily travel back to France, then sneak back into London from there. Jennifer and I have moved on with our lives and are now married. I just hope that Nicole and her psycho brother don't try to hunt us down again. I am a 27-year-old male. I spent about a year in San Francisco as part of a job. Although I enjoy living in the Bay Area very much, the extremely high cost of living there and the distance from friends and family was too difficult for long-term stability. As such, I was eager to return to my home state of Louisiana. I ended up finding a job near my hometown that was a much better fit for me and was closer to my family. After resigning from my position, I quickly packed my belongings into my car and began the 2,000-mile journey back home. Given that I had very long work days, I had no time to explore the beautiful state of California while I was living there. Therefore, I decided to fully enjoy myself and visit some nice places along the way. I met up with friends in SoCal and visited the beaches in Los Angeles and San Diego. After a few days, I resumed my journey. I stopped at a rest area in Arizona to refill my gas tank and grab some lunch. While walking back from the restroom, I noticed a beat-up old van in the parking lot. It was white and had red and blue streaks. I saw a man sitting in the driver's seat, smoking a cigarette. He looked like the kind of person that panhandles outside of a gas station. As I walked by, the man smiled and waved at me. I immediately felt a deep discomfort in my chest that spread to my gut. I gave him a quick nod and carried on, then promptly got into my car and drove off. I stopped at a hotel in Tucson for the night. After checking in, I went back to my car to retrieve some things. I immediately noticed a beat-up van in the parking lot in front of the hotel. It looked just like the van from the rest area. At first, I brushed it off as just another creepy old van, but I recognized the red and blue paint streaks on the side. This design didn't look like it was on purpose, more like it was parked next to some half-assed painters. So this was definitely the same van I saw at the rest area. I figured maybe it was some bizarre coincidence, and the man was heading in the same direction I was. I quickly retreated to my hotel room for the night. The following morning, once I got to my car, I looked at the front parking lot. The van was no longer there. I was relieved and resumed my journey. I decided to make a stop in Albuquerque to do some exploring. There was a festival taking place in the downtown area. I walked around and enjoyed the live music. As I stood in line at one of the food trucks, I started to experience that weird sensation when you're in danger, and immediately saw a man about 200 feet away from me, staring. He was standing beside a tree, smoking a cigarette. It was the same man from the rest area. I decided to walk towards him to get a better look, and and he quickly disappeared into the crowd. I was shocked. This was no longer a coincidence. This man was following me. I quickly returned to my car and drove off. I then called my parents while I was on the highway. I told them about the man who was following me. My dad just brushed it off and said, "You know, a lot of people are traveling on the same roads and stopping in the same cities along the way. I think you're just being paranoid." My mom, on the other hand, seemed a bit more concerned. "Please be aware of your surroundings and make sure you're keeping your phone charged." They both advised me to stop at my brother's house in Dallas rather than drive straight to Louisiana. I drove for 6 more hours. Once it became dark, I decided to pull over at a rest area along a country road. I was exhausted and needed a break. The rest area was very remote and had very little lighting. I literally passed out on my steering wheel once I was parked. I was woken up by a very loud knock at the driver's side window. I turned to my left and saw someone standing outside. It was dark, and I couldn't see who the person was at first. I turned on the dome lights, and I immediately recognized the person. I then saw a beat-up white van parked right next to my car. My heart began racing. The man grinned at me and signaled for me to roll down my window. "I need some help. Roll down your window. Now." Again, I shook my head and said no. He immediately became upset and began pounding on my window. The man then attempted to open my door, but luckily, I kept all my car doors locked. He then pulled out a knife and hissed, "Open your damn door." I started my engine and put my car into reverse. He began running after my car with a knife in his hand. I couldn't stop hyperventilating. I was on the verge of a panic attack. But I drove out of the rest area and continued down the highway. I called up my parents again and informed them about what just happened. They were shocked. No one could dismiss this as a coincidence now. They believed it would be worthwhile to call the police, but that it might be difficult for them to really do anything about it, as the rest area was in the middle of nowhere, and it was unlikely that there were any cameras in the parking lot. I was about 5 hours from my brother's house. My parents encouraged me to stop at the nearest big city, which was about an hour away, and stay at a hotel for the night. I ended up contacting the police the very next day and filed a report. I provided the rest stop's location and a description of the van. The officer forwarded that information to the highway patrol, but as expected, they couldn't do anything about it. The man was probably miles away by that point. I was strongly encouraged to stay off the country roads and avoid driving at night. I eventually made it to Dallas and told my brother and my sister-in-law about what was happening. My brother, being the true gun-loving Texan he is, said that he would have his firearms ready just in case something happened. I spent about a week in Dallas and then drove back home to Louisiana. Thankfully, I did not encounter that man again. Since this traumatic experience, I have refrained from taking long road trips alone, and I'm almost always scared to drive through the countrysides now. It's almost too easy to disappear without a trace in these areas. What frightens me the most about all this is that a random stranger relentlessly followed me for several miles from Arizona to Texas over the course of 2 days. I always wonder what his intentions were and what would have happened if I wasn't able to escape from that rest area.